longtime colleague, Melanie Sill, who is the editor and senior vice president at the Sacramento Bee. And she's going to talk to us about reinventing the role of the journalist, which I think is of interest to all of us, including those of you who are going to be doing a lot of that reinventing yourself. She comes to this topic with great journalism chops. Is it true that you were born in Nebraska and raised in Hawaii? I like that combo. That's a good combo. Went to the University of North Carolina, a terrific journalism school. Spent much of your career at the Raleigh News and Observer. Was a leader in Pulitzer for public service that went to, I think, 3 editors and reporters at the News and Observer.
2 reporters
and you were the president of the editor. A really remarkable series, which I remember well. It was sort of Boss Hog. It was about the effects of the fast-growing in North Carolina hog industry. I know that, having come from Iowa, and I was always looking at North Carolina. The effects, both the environmental and social, of the fast-growing hog industry and its wastes. Really a hell of a series. Then was managing editor and editor of the News and Observer, and came to Sacramento how many years ago?
A little over 3 years ago.
A little over 3 years ago. Melanie has served on the judging panel of the Selden Ring for the past 2 years, and is chairing it this year, and I'm very grateful to her for that, and looking forward to what you have to tell us about reinventing journalism. Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks, Geneva. So, my ulterior motive always in talking to groups like this is to hear from you, so you may be disappointed to hear that I don't have a long speech. But here's a question that I'm asking pretty constantly in our newsroom these days, and that is, what is the role of a journalist in a digital age? And of course we know we're in an age where information is described as a commodity. News can be found everywhere. People build their own news feeds. People seek news from trusted sources, people they know on Facebook and sites that they trust. There's lots and lots of competition for people's time. And if you think about it, the number of websites that are created every day, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, the number of new places you can go to seek information every day is expanding rapidly, but the number of hours in the day are not. That's that's one of the few finite numbers. And so people have choices on where to spend their time. So one of the big changes in the last year is how much more time people are spending watching movies on streaming. So it's less time for news because people have more options for entertainment on their phones and on their laptops. So that's the context. So what is the role of journalists in that? And I think of the 3 basic things I think journalism does. There are many things that journalism has done. One was inform people. The second I think is really important is engage people in public life. And the third is empower people to make decisions. That's not about what format or what medium you use. But so I think journalism and journalists are still really important, but we all of us who want to do this work and who are doing this work have to continue to ask why and how we can be important. I don't think there's any less need for independent and trustworthy information. There's not less need for convenience, and one of the things a newspaper has always done is put the news all in one place so you can very conveniently sit down and read the news and have a great summary. It's comprehensiveness. There's not less need for context. There's not less need for a geographic connection in a community. People feel often overwhelmed by information. In fact, surveys of young people often find that young people in particular feel overwhelmed by information. And most surveys show a lot of support in the public for investigative reporting, whatever you call it, watchdog reporting, accountability reporting. That's something that the public believes is really important and usually wants more of. So, you know, my view of the landscape is there's a lot of tremendous work being done by lots of players, and traditional news organizations are still doing the lion's share of investigative work. There are a lot of new nonprofit newsrooms that are adding a lot of value, new media sites, the ones with the journalistic mindset and approach combined with innovation are some of the most exciting. You see new things like the 538 polling site that got absorbed by the New York Times, PolitiFact, fact-checking, Politico. A lot of these new things, again, get at some of these basic needs. People want good information, they want fast information, they want trustworthy information, and so on. So here's my newspaper. My newspaper is 150, almost 154 years old. But what we talk about is that we're like a startup, and we face the challenge of proving that we're relevant in a new age, and that we're valuable. And how do we do that? The Bee, for those who don't know, we still are the largest news provider in our region by far. We have a reach of about 1.7, 1.8 billion people a week through our newspaper and our website. Our print circulation has dropped a lot, but it's leveled off, and we're actually growing on Sunday again. And so we go back to some of the fundamental ideas of why we're here. And so that's what I'm talking about. Recently we went through another downsizing. Our downsizing was one of the news stories out of our industry over the past few years. And it's been very hard for people who've been in the business a long time, and wrenching, and been pushed by economic change and by what you hear about as secular change or shifting to digital media. But what we talk about is really the basics, okay? Why are we here? What can we do for people? How do we inform people? How do we engage people? How do we empower people to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise be able to make? So my concept of journalism has always been is that the medium for transferring power. You know the phrase, knowledge is power, right? Nobody ever says information is power. Information can provide, you know, armed with information, people always say. But journalism can be about the transfer of knowledge to people so that they can be better citizens, be smarter consumers, be more able to fight for their own causes, and so on. And so, despite the fact that there's a ton of information out there, I think people still value knowledge and value agents that transfer knowledge to them. Don't you always appreciate the sense that you've read something and it makes you feel smarter, or it makes you feel more able to make a good decision, or that you're ahead of the pack? So what we've been talking about and are working on is a model that opens up what we do much more intentionally to the community. You sort of talk about the open newsroom, where you pretend there's no walls around the newsroom, and maybe, as one paper has done, actually take its newsroom out into a coffee shop. If we were out in the community interacting with people directly all the time, how would we do? So I want to just show a couple of things that demonstrate that. This is a new blog. It's not a radical idea. It's our city reporter in Sacramento. The blog's called City Bee. But it's the way he's approaching his feed now is very much to talk to people in our community about what he's trying to do with his reporting, get their input as he goes along on the reporting, get people talking about the issues and asking them what they want to know and how he should cover it. So in Sacramento, we have a big fight over homeless people camping along the American River. There's a proposal to build a kind of permanent tent encampment area for homeless people. He went up to Seattle this week to check this out. So he says, I'm up in Seattle reporting. What should I do? You know, what are you interested in knowing? This is one of many ways he's covered the Bee. He runs polls. He invites comment. And comment is easy, but he's also inviting input into the reporting. Again, this is sort of it sounds like a no-brainer, but it's very different, I think, from the way city reporters covered news when I was a reporter. This is one of the first blogs we started at the Bee after I got there. It also seems like a no-brainer. Sacramento has the largest concentration of state employees, but we've never had a reporter covering them. We've covered government, right? Tens of thousands of people is the largest part of our workforce. So this is our most active and often most heavily trafficked blog. And if you were to go in and look at the interchange that the reporter has with people who read this blog, you'll see that he is constantly reporting back to his readership. He writes a column for the print paper, and he writes page one stories for the print paper, and he writes this blog, which is very active. When he first started it, it was almost to the point of exhaustion because there was so much to report and so much interaction with people. And I said, John, you know, if there's any constituency that's going to understand 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, this is it. So, you know, you've got to pace yourself on this. But this blog often gets between 750,000 and 1 million page views a month. Tremendous amount of interaction with them. And what I like about it, this is going to sound odd coming from the editor, but he didn't think about what his editors wanted to do. He thinks about what's going on out there that I need to tell people about, and you know, how am I accountable to people who rely on me for news, which again is that idea of open season. That homeless issue I described, we have had a package of stories and a video, had a public affairs section cover story with the describing what was going on in these campgrounds, and this it's a kind of endless cycle of rousing homeless people from their tent encampments. The conflict is that they're camping along a very popular parkway where people bicycle and walk, and you know, it's dirty, there's human waste, there's refuse, there's danger. Some of these folks are mentally ill, alcoholics, drug users. But we also have used our Facebook page to have a kind of different kind of discussion. You know, these aren't people coming to our site now, they're having the discussion on Facebook, but it's a very different kind of discussion where people are going back and forth with each other. Obviously, they're using their real names. We also have a discussion in our forum on factbee.com, and we're just trying to use every channel we can. So, you know, part of it is getting people to come to us to discuss things, and this is going to where people are. A lot of people are on Facebook, so let's go out of Facebook and say, let's have the discussion here, and then we'll bring it back into the paper. And then the last thing I want to talk about is something that we started after, with some help from Vicki Porter's program at the Night Digital Media Center. This is a regional blog and website network called the Sacramento Connect, and it's connected to the Bee through a variety of ways. One is this toolbar here, so this is how you get to Sacramento Connect. We started with about 20 partners, blogs, and websites. We have now about 110. And it's, you know, all kinds of topic areas and interests. And this is the homepage. This is built on a WordPress template where you can we select some of the best local blog posts and topics. We also have widgets that, this is the Sacramento Connect widget that also appears on pages within the Sacramento Bee. So people who come to the Sacramento Bee can find out about some of the best local content in the digital world in our region, sometimes by topic. So if you go to the sports page, you'll find several local bloggers who blog on the Sacramento Kings. We're thinking about moving to Anaheim, by the way. And if you go on the politics page, you'll find political bloggers and so on. And the toolbar also lets people do the usual things, you know, tweet a story or like a story or post it to their Facebook profile. And it also has an advertising position that's proved to be fairly successful for us. The blog partners, in addition to being part of this digital network, are we have meetings, social gatherings with bloggers. we have a kind of steady conversation with many of them. Some of them are very shy, I'll say, you know, but they're getting exposure, more traffic to their sites. We feature them, featured bloggers in the print edition, which you know, it's very exciting to some of them because they get a lot of their neighbors and friends who might have heard their blogging. And so it's a whole range from a couple of hardcore political blogs down to some just people who blog for personal interest on various topics. A lot of food, a lot of gardening, a lot of local news from the foothills areas and so on. So this has been another way of connecting the bee to the community and having just a lot of touch points. So those are some of the ideas we're working on. And then I want to stop and hear your ideas and have some dialogue. You know, this is, people hear so much, and of course those of us in the business talk so much about the financial challenges of the news industry. And those are real, those are tremendous. You know, we're kind of living through one of those eras that a lot of people are going to write really smart books about. Some are already writing smart books about it, although I don't think we really know exactly where the story is going yet. I think it's a really energizing time because, you know, if you look through the history of journalism and newspapers, through most of it, it was a huge battle. To do good work, to pay for good work, you know, competition. You know, around the turn of the 19th century, there were dozens of newspapers, and many of them died. When I got into the business, there were afternoon papers in many cities. There was one way. So most of the history of our business has been on the commercial side, battling and competing for attention and credibility. People like me got into the business during this brief window of time of great prosperity and very little competition for daily newspapers. So that's the perspective. When I look at all the things that are possible and all the things that are needed, I think this is maybe the most exciting time to be in journalism since I got in the business. I remind myself of that sometimes, when it feels like the most exhausting time since I got into the business. The other thing I think about is that so many things are happening now, aside from journalism, so many things are happening now that will shape the world for you all, for the students, people in college in their 20s now. You have been handed a lot of things that are really daunting to deal with in terms of what kind of life are you going to have, what kind of world are you going to live in, what kind of nation is this going to be. And so coming back to those basic needs, you know, trustworthy information, credible information. You know, it'd be nice if democracy worked, that they put everything out on a website and we all got to look at it and vote and we all knew what was going on. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of decisions get made in secret, without public input, by powerful people who are out to protect their own interests. So journalists have a big job to do in making sure that the public stays in the loop about what's happening and that people who are being affected by decisions know about them. So there is a real need for journalism in the same way there has always been to make a better world. And so I get a lot of satisfaction of talking and working with some of the younger people I meet in the business who have that same passion to make a difference and do great things that stand out. That same passion that almost anybody who's ever gone into this kind of work has had. So that's why when Jimmy asked me if I would do this, I jumped at it because now I get to hear from you all. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, you started out with, at the beginning, talking about the three sort of roles, and you had inform and then engage. And everything that we're looking at tells us that anybody under, say, age 30 is looking at their news on their phone or on their iPad, and they constantly say, I won't read on if I'm not engaged. So I'm wondering if you're finding that you have to shift your emphasis from what we would traditionally say inform, and then kind of scoop the engage up and make it more of a priority than inform. I'm just wondering if that's something that you wrestle with.
Oh yeah, why do you think there's so many flashing things?
Yeah.
Breaking news, I think that is because there's so much flashing, engaging people. Is something we certainly talk a lot. That's not new. When we did the Hog series, okay, so just for background, we were working on this. The reporters were working on this for a couple of months, and then finally the whole newsroom knew that we were going to run a 5-part series on pigs. It was sort of scoffed at, to put it mildly, but because it was about pigs, we wanted people to read it, and we worked really hard on engaging, because I never had any satisfaction in producing long stories that nobody read. So we said, this was not pre-internet, it was 1995, so the News and Observer, where I worked, was one of the first newspapers to have a website. And actually had a whole team that they bought them a car, and they had a video camera that was about this big, and sent them around doing stories for multimedia. But nobody had broadband. Everybody was on dial-up. So you can imagine, on a 2400 baud modem, trying to watch video. But with the Hog series, the reporter went, Joby Ward, now at the Washington Post, covering international espionage. He went into one of these big hog barns. These hog barns, they contain thousands of animals, and these animals were given so many drugs that they didn't have any immune systems, so you had to actually shower and put on a clean suit to go into the hog barn. He took a tape recorder in, and at that time, the way you did audio was you had these phone lines that people would call in on to hear audio. So we put on the phone line the sound of the interior of one of these hog barns, which just sounded like screaming. It sounded like a riot. The hogs were like kicking the sides of the barn. So thousands of people called in to hear that. With the little thing. If you want to hear the inside of a hog barn. So even back then, I always wanted to work on getting people. News is interesting. It should look interesting and strike people as interesting. And that was one of the bad things, I think. I don't know, you guys can say if you disagree. In the 80s and 90s, newspapers got really, really dull, in my view. I mean, just sort of assumed a lot of interest, that we all copied each other, and newspapers all looked alike, the sections all had the same names. No matter where you went in the country, it was like the newspaper was fairly similar. And I think, lost touch, even though we were losing readers, as you look back, we were losing readers, we lost touch with that need to engage. So I think it's that about good headlines, good visuals, using visuals in a much smarter way, and so on.
I want to be sure we get some student questions after Judy, so be thinking of questions, students.
Yeah. I'm a broadcast journalist, and I've always been so appalled in the state by the lack of coverage in Sacramento. I mean, they just don't have anybody up there. And you guys, you got Dan Walters is one of the best political columnists in the state, who I call when I need somebody to be plugged in. But what do you think that's about? Is it poor storytelling abilities that they can't cover the State House and make it interesting to people? Is it just one reporter, Channel 7 here, said, oh, it's just a ratings black hole, like that explains their obligation. I mean, I'm just sort of appalled by that, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on it, or if you're glad you got the whole thing to yourself.
No, that not just TV, but there are many fewer reporters in the Capitol now. And for television, I think it's always been hard because of what are the visuals, right? Yeah. Broadcast runs off of pictures, right? And so we have one station, KCRA, that still has a Capitol reporter in Sacramento. The others don't, even in Sacramento. And so
you're kidding? In Sacramento?
KBIE, the public television, does reporting in public radio. So I think it's a combination of, I mean, even outside Sacramento, the newspapers find that public interest in state government per se isn't as high as they would like it to be. But I think it's how you do it too. So we get a lot of traffic on our website from outside Sacramento in California. And the state worker blog, I get email from people all over California about issues. And so with television, I think it's a combination of both those things. If you look at, I mean, most television doesn't really even cover local government very much in the markets.
I was just curious, it's really cool what you're doing with getting all these engaged readers talking back on important public service issues. And I was wondering, do you think that that's specifically because you're living, like Sacramento happens to be a place where there is so much civic action going on because people are directly connected to government? And I was also wondering if you're seeing the same people coming back, or if this is sort of new people coming in and out into this conversation.
Are you talking about the state worker particularly?
The state worker and also the city blog that you...
The city blog. The city blog is new, and we think that's a very heavily local audience, right? I think for any publication, wherever they are, there's something that place is about, and there are, I guess, what I would call destiny issues for that place. In some places, it's about a particular industry. In some places, it's about a particular amenity. So we own the paper in San Luis Obispo, and tourism is really important. There are things that are really important and identity issues in the community. So I think that understanding that would shape what your version of the state worker would be. And so it can't be a cookie cutter. So you know, if we tried to start the state worker in LA, it probably wouldn't work. But if you started the hospital worker, it probably would. I mean, it's about, I think, some of the smart people who write about these things and understanding not what the content is, but what the audience is, what the interest group is. And not just a narrow special interest, but obviously political junkies and lobbyists and influencers and people like that. And they pick up some general leadership ones.
And are you getting a wide, like, is it the same people that are contributing? Or
who are commenting?
Yeah.
It's a lot of different ones. And one of the best things for reporting is you get a lot of tips. Not just tips, but you get people who really know about these issues. So they might not comment right on the blog, but they'll email the reporter. And so he gets good information. So you tap into people who are really knowledgeable out there. So you could never, just find, if you were trying to figure out, I want to know who knows about this or who's involved in this. But if he says in the blog, I want to know who knows about this and who's involved in this, email me. They do. And so it's led to a lot of really terrific stories. Yeah.
You talked about the financial crisis of newspapers and how much money is the Sacramento Bee making, and how in McClatchy newspapers generally, what are the actual profits in newspapers these days?
Yeah, they never tell you things like that. I think that McClatchy reports, it's a publicly traded company, so it reports its financial results publicly, and so the operating cash flow last year was something like 380 million or something like that. Revenues of $1.5 billion. Now those numbers, then they like after this, before this, and so it doesn't really. That's not really the kind of environment I work in. The Bee, we don't release financial results by individual papers, and so what we work with is a budget. If anybody understands, right? This is what you're supposed to have in revenue, and this is what your expenses are. If revenue drops, which is what's been going on in newspaper in media the past few years, then expenses have to drop too, and that's what we're working on.
The Bee may be making a lot of money, or is it?
Oh, the Bee is Bee is profitable. All the McClatchy pictures have been profitable throughout. We haven't been like some companies where papers have dropped into the rooms.
Along that line, and I think it's important, it kind of goes to the conversation we were having. There was a time 10 years ago and before, or maybe it's even longer than 10 years ago, when the editor didn't worry about where the money came from.
Right.
And that's kind of the generator being successful now, is as they develop and work to connect with the community, they are thinking more creatively about revenue than the business side of the operation. That the business side of the operation hasn't really embraced or understands technology. And I think a lot of what she's talking about that they've come up with out in the newsroom is actually providing revenue that came out of their idea box, not the business side's box.
Yeah.
I have a question about the blog network. Is there any money involved, or do they keep the posts for free? Or?
Well, so this is a website that aggregates.
Yeah.
They blog on their blogs. They sell whatever advertising they want on them. So these are still their blogs. They're not blogging for us.
All right.
So what we do is bring a lot, kind of highlight, gather together as a network. And then we are in the process of developing the advertising network where there'll be some opportunities to sell into those blogs and share revenue. And then our revenue comes mostly from this toolbar down at the bottom, which, little inspirational stories. This vendor's called Nebo. The company's run by 3 Stanford students in a dorm room. Classic story, right? Now very successful. But this is this ad position is very successful in click-through rates compared to other kinds of interactive advertising. Advertisers love it. This is AT&T. They have rich media. This is a fairly simple ad, but if they have video, poll surveys, it works pretty well. It's not as intrusive. Sometimes they jump around a little bit on the first view. And so that is bringing in, I would say, more than respectable revenue and has made it worthwhile for us. But we started out just basically saying, we wanted to do this. We saw opportunity on the content side. We thought that there would be a lot of traffic driven from the blogs back to us, and that's been less so than we expected. We're probably sending more traffic to them than they're sending to us. But we're developing new ways, like these widgets, where a widget like this might live on one of our partner sites if they wanted. And they also carry the toolbar on their site. That's the only thing we're asking them for to be part of the network is put one line of code on your website and carry this toolbar. Yeah.
What are you able to achieve on your Facebook page that you don't achieve on your home page? And how do you harness that to build energy to the brand?
It's a kind of a quality of comment. We had a fire at the Bee this morning. There was a fire in the press room. No big deal, but I was interested in the comments. So, if you look at the comments on Facebook, let's see what is there here. Oh, this is a different story. I'm sorry. The comments are much more constructive. They're less. The comments here on the fire. Glad no one was hurt. Glad everyone is safe. If you look at the comments on our stories on the site, it's like, too bad it didn't burn down, They're anonymous. It's anonymous versus named. We're working real hard on trying to encourage better commenting on our main site. But I think we're seeing the quality, and it's also, again, people feel like it's part of their community. They're just, and this is new. We just started. This is the first actual discussion we posted on the Facebook page. We mostly use Facebook as a way to kind of tell people about things and point them back to the site.
So, but that's essentially taking place kind of off-site in an environment that you're not as able to control or
Right.
as able to monetize
Right.
or is able to kind of, again, take that energy and that engagement and sort of channel it back into your mainstream. Do you see any opportunities to do that in the future?
Yeah. I mean, we're just starting using Facebook for this. rather than just saying, hey, come like us, come visit us, you know, or come do something about the community or that's beneficial to you. And so it's like everything else. It's sort of, well, let's try it, let's see how it goes, let's see what we learn from it. Yes?
So you mentioned that you've been using Facebook for sort of updates. Have you also found that Twitter's useful and you can contact with you using that?
Yeah, we have a bunch of Twitter accounts, and I think that that question you asked is more of a question with Twitter, really. So you're a breaking news situation, right? You have people who sign up to get breaking news alerts, breaking news text alerts, so on and so forth. What's the reporter going to do first? Well, what's the easiest? Twitter, right? So this is where we are hungering for better technology that allows a single input and multiple outputs for that kind of information. And it was an interesting David Carr piece in the New York Times about Twitter and Facebook and Quora and some of the other social media sites that create space and ask people to come and put things there. And so that's good because it allows you to reach the community, but it's not good in that you do have a business. And so there's some dilemmas there. And we sort of want it all, but when we're choosing in certain situations, we're going to choose in certain situations to concentrate on our customers and readers first. And, if we were in Tripoli, I think that might be different because, you know, of wanting to get as much circulation as you can for the information you're reporting.
So is that single input, multiple output a possibility for the Annenberg Innovation Lab?
That's a good question. I mean, I also have a sort of an ethical question about the use of Twitter. Are reporters tweeting stuff before it has appeared in the paper? And have you set guidelines about how they release that information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They do tweet stuff, and we put out breaking news alerts on things before they're storified and published. But we're not, we follow the same guidelines we have if we were publishing a breaking news item on the site. In other words, is it factual and going to be true? If somebody's standing there watching a fire, they can say flames are reaching, you know, okay, that's fine. But if they're going to say, well, I heard that 3 people died, they're not to tweet that. So we do have guidelines on it. Again, it's our name on it, so if it goes out, people are going to hold us accountable for it. And TV, I think, is much faster to say, we heard somebody died. We're not saying somebody died, it's like, we heard somebody died. And sometimes they're right. I mean, yes.
The multi-platform thing can pretty easily be solved if you have a certain kind of Twitter platform that allows you to tweet straight onto Facebook. So that's actually just quick.
Onto Facebook, but then in terms of then getting it to our people who signed up for text alerts and breaking news alerts. But if you can solve it,
but one of the things, so I've done field research at a couple of these organizations, including the Times, and I've also been looking at this question. And one of the things I think that is important to realize is people don't just die on this site. It's not like they just come to Facebook or they just come to Twitter and stay back. And I think people come to Twitter for the quick things and then they come back for the bigger story. So to answer your question in a way, and I think that's important just from being in like other newsrooms, that this is the starting point for going back to your site. So it's not like you're using all of that, but the argument you have to make to your advertisers is that this counts as engagement too. So, sorry, I probably shouldn't be saying
No,
that.
this was my alternative.
So, yeah, so, I mean, because this is also engagement, and then these users are the most valuable users of them all because they're the ones that are increasingly going back and forth.
Exactly.
So do those of you who see this and who use other websites and social media have any tips for Melanie? Make her visit especially worthwhile? What would you do with some of the things you've seen that the Sac Bee is doing, which I must say are more innovative than a lot of the things that many newspapers are doing? Does anybody who's working for Neon Tommy or anywhere else have some tips? One thing I'd love to know while people are thinking is, what about the rest of your policies on your reporters appearing on social media? Because those are really, you know, do you want them to have a lot of voice, but you don't want them to, you know, go beyond the normal news standards? How do you?
Well, we talked about that with Ryan. Ryan is one of our younger reporters. He's a little about to turn 30, and Cal, sorry, but about doing this blog and writing with voice. We have guidelines, but the way I shorthand it is that, say people, you know, you're asked to go on public radio and talk about your story. Think about how you talk about it, right? You know, you hear reporters on NPR all the time being interviewed about their reporting. That's sort of how it is. If you can talk about your reporting, insight, what's the backstory, what are the things you can share, but you're still in the role. You're still a reporter. If you're an editorial writer or a columnist, you can opine, that's your role. Remind people that you're an editorial writer, you're a columnist. That's your job, to have opinions. Generally, I tried to take the approach to say, we want to do this. Here are some things to think about. What questions do you have? And we've adapted some of our guidelines. You know, when we first started doing blogs at the end, when the newspapers first started doing blogs, people were really terrified about this. Editors especially were really terrified. And so, you know, they came and said, well, we need to kind of make a policy and so on. So why don't we just see who wants to do what and what they want to do, and then we'll see if we can sign off on that. And then we built the guidelines as we went along. And, you know, it ended up being not halfway as dangerous as we thought. You know, getting back to the kind of early years of newspaper, the early 20th century, Jane Roberts, who was editor of the Philly Inquirer and New York Times, and started his career at the News Observer in Raleigh. Well, that was his first big job. But he told me a story about when he was a reporter at the News Observer, he would type up his story, and the city editor was not just assigning us all the stories, he was also editing all the stories and laying out the paper. Not the front page, but he laid out the local section. And they had these pneumatic tubes in newsrooms. It's sort of hard to think about, but you know, you would type your story, you roll it up and put it in the pneumatic tube. This was gone before I got to the end of it. And you put it in this thing and it would get sucked through the building and then end up down where they would typeset it. Right? So Gene said he would take his story over to the city editor and hand it to him. The city editor would look at it and say, look at Gene and say, is it good? And Gene would say, yes. Okay. He'd roll it up, put it in the tube, and it would go down and go to typeset. No editing whatsoever. And so, you know, maybe everything old is new, but you know, my first job was at a twice-a-week paper in the mountains. I took pictures. I worked in the pay stuff room, you know, where they would like put the paper through wax and, you know, lay it on the page and so on. And then I worked at the wire services, where you wrote stories for broadcast and you rewrote them for print, or you wrote them for the afternoon paper and the morning paper. And sometimes I think that my job now is all of that. It's taking the pictures and laying out the paper and writing for AM and writing for PM and so on and so forth.
But it's also more than that. I mean, again, as a broadcaster, I'm interested in watching how print people traditionally kind of put down their noses at some of the skills we did, are now learning audio and video.
It's hard.
And aren't very good at it.
Oh, it's hard.
And I'm, you know, it's kind of interesting. I mean, is there any training given to reporters in terms of getting great sound and getting great pictures? And
we have done
do
some
they
training,
have to do it all themselves?
including some training with our public radio station. Audio has been less. Audio by itself has been less useful to us. There was a brief period of time when you saw our websites that say, click here to listen to the. But if you don't have photos,
but like sound slides would be.
So the photographers have worked with sound slides. Video, we've been through bursts of everybody's going to do video, and then it's not getting much traffic, and it's time-consuming. And as you said, what we're putting up, a lot of it wasn't very good, and so we've gotten more narrow in how we're using video. And I think we're starting to work more with broadcast partners too, because it is really hard. I really admire those skills to do strong reporting and tell a story well visually through broadcast. It's really so time consuming.
How much do you use analytics, following what people read and actually do on your website? And do you follow the advice you get from them?
Well, I have my own accounts on Omniture and look at reports, daily, and we get other kinds of. I think you do pay attention because it's a way of people saying, yeah, I like that. It's also help me understand that this is a different medium. A website is a different medium from a print paper. And just because a story doesn't get a lot of web hits doesn't mean it wasn't a good story. It just means that particular story might be more effective in print. But it also might mean that people aren't that interested in it. So you can't dismiss it entirely. But what we find gets so much traffic on our website: breaking news, photo galleries, photography of any kind, certain topic areas. We have a crime blog along with the state worker blog that is also up there in about 1 million page views. Weather. The snow story. Snow story is
So it sounds like you have the typical, 20% of the stories bring in 80% of the people.
Yes.
So do you actually use that information to do editorial decisions? The resources are scarce. So what should we do to do the best 20% we can?
We've used that information to prioritize on photography over video, for instance. We have a certain number of photojournalists, and video is, really kind of climbing uphill for us. Then we use video on breaking news and on stories where the video storytelling really seems to be well suited to that story, and it's going to have a longer shelf life, so you don't have to rely on this one day's traffic. We probably use it more to think about how to play things on the site rather than on what to cover. But it also has reminded us that we need, and it's a great thing. I was so excited when we went online because, for years you could never beat television and breaking news, and now we can. So that's just great. Because we still have so many more reporters and so on. So it's understanding too. We've done a lot with databases. I didn't talk about that here, but we've been really active with using data to tell stories, data visualization. The most popular database is the state government salary lookup, including university. And when I first got to the Bee, they didn't have that, and I thought it was sort of. And then our data guys came and said, "Hey, we're going to seem right to me," and I, was not. I was a little blissfully innocent, and it caused a huge fuss. I had SEIU picketing the building and death threats and all kinds of things because people didn't like that. But it is heavily trafficked still, hundreds of thousands of page views every month in a steady way. And I think I've also heard from a lot of state workers who said, I didn't like this at first, but I went and looked at all this, and I went and said my pay wasn't right, and so pay equity issues have been on. And somebody in Annenberg maybe did a study saying it's made everybody more happy.
So 10 years ago or 15 years ago, a newspaper editor never would have really been comfortable sitting down with advertisers to have discussion. But do you ever talk to advertisers about what they want and how they want to connect with your audience?
I don't talk directly with advertisers. I talk a lot with our ad people and probably have a different kind of conversation with them we've had in the past. And our publisher, I think is probably is a very news-oriented publisher and is probably the best person within our company to convene that kind of conversation. I have talked to advertisers about content and what we're trying to do with content and who we think the readers are and so forth, in a pretty limited way. But I think that, I think that there aren't as many taboos as long as you remember who you are and what your job is, and you're clear with everybody about that. So I continue to have the kind of conversation and say, well, I know you advertise in the paper, but that doesn't really connect to our news coverage, and I have a publisher and a company that backs me up. Yeah.
I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm often asked by young people where the opportunities are going to be for them in the future. Do you see opportunities for young filmmakers to become visual reporters and work with organizations that have been traditionally print-oriented? Because it sounds like video is right now not something that is clearly as valuable as photography or print. Do you still see a potential for more convergence?
I think as much as things have changed in the last 5 years, I think that they're going to continue to change. And so this streaming phenomenon, video on demand, the technical capacity for people to watch high quality video on their mobile phone, that could change the equation with video storytelling. It's hard to know, because it's not that we didn't like it, but it was just that, you have 40 hours go into a piece, and it gets 300 views, and almost anybody has to say, gee, that doesn't pencil out so well. And so the Miami Herald did a documentary, out of its Haiti work with the filmmaker, and I think that that's probably where there's a lot of promise, because I think, Judy said, that a lot of print newsrooms, it's not only we can shoot video, but the editing, the producing, the understanding how you tell a story in that medium, those aren't skills that are inherent in most newsrooms, even most broadcast newsrooms, right? So I have seen some things done. I just judged a different contest for ASME, and there was a little paper that did a video documentary a year after a horrific child abuse death in their community, where they interviewed the different responders, police officers, and the ambulance driver, and a couple of others, because this was a small community, and this was so traumatic for them. And it's the kind of thing you think, well, we deal with these all the time, child abuse people get. But it was really powerfully done. It was done all through interviews, just the interviews with the subjects, telling the narrative, carrying the narrative. And that was done in a small newspaper newsroom by their photojournalists, and it was terrific, 20-minute video. They went out, but they did something smart. They didn't just show it on their website and say, go look at it. They took it out of the community. They had community showings. They created a discussion. They covered the discussion in their paper. So it's like that interaction between what you do here, what you do here. You kind of carry that. You carry the discussion to different places, and you widen the impact.
To reach your audience.
Yeah.
You really use it as a tool of engagement.
Yeah.
Following up on this question, I wonder if you could share with our students your thoughts about the skills you look for when you're hiring young
journalists. Good writing and reporting, getting back to how decisions are made and what we're trying to do with telling people things they can't actually just figure out for themselves by reading. So good writing and reporting, I think, is a skill set for no matter what discipline you're going into. I often say technologically literate. So we don't need every reporter we hire to be able to be a master at Final Cut Pro. But we do need for people just to understand how governments use data to keep track of things, so you don't need to be able to do a database analysis yourself, but you do need to understand if you're doing this kind of story, you're going to get a public record of data. This kind of story might call for video. Language skills continue to be good, especially Spanish language, and in our market, Chinese and Vietnamese are also important. And I think this is not a skill, it's a quality, but initiative. And honestly, there was a period of time in the 90s that people coming out of journalism school, this was during the real prosperous times, during the .com boom. It was a little disconcerting that people were coming right out of college and wanting to be in top beats and not wanting to, I don't want to work my way up, you know, and there was a different, I mean, you've heard about this Gen X, Gen Y, or whatever it is, but I really think that a lot of the young journalists I meet now have just right, and sometimes they say, well, I can't wait till they're in charge, and maybe I'll just get out of the way and let them take over. So I think that that kind of capacity that journalists have always had, if you land in a new situation, you got to figure out how to get the story, you got to figure out how to get it done. That capacity to say, what am I trying to do and how can I get it done, is really the quality I look for when I'm talking to people. So not like, what is it you want me to do, but here's what I'm interested, here's what I've done and why, and what I want to do. And it's so much easier for an editor to work with someone who wants to do things and help them do them than to say, when the worst question anybody can ask me is, what do you want me to do? Well, if I knew what the stories were, why would I be reporting? But it is a quality, a character trait.
Can you teach that quality? Can you inculcate that quality?
You can encourage it. You can enable it.
You have a great experience in assessing the quality of journalism, especially in print. Is the quality of the best pieces getting better, staying the same, going downhill in this financial decline? What would you say about the quality of journalism you see at the top level?
I think the quality is good. I think that a lot of the collaboration impulse is producing work that we couldn't have done before. And I think you saw this with this ProPublica New Orleans police shooting work and some other pieces. I think where the gaps are, though, in a lot of the local newsrooms, smaller papers, where you had to lose enough people that there are huge areas of coverage that nobody's showing up for. I think that's where, so on the higher level investigation, national investigation and so on, I think the quality is good. I think political reporting is a lot better today than it was during the era of Woodward and Bernstein. I just think that there's more holding people accountable and just because there's so much competition around it, I think that I think where we've seen losses is medical reporting, environmental reporting, local government coverage from medium-sized papers where we used to be able to have reporters covering a lot of towns, and now we have reporters who cover broad regions and try to pick up on what the community papers are reporting and look for news and so on. So I think that's where the loss has been, kind of the everyday journalism.
Well, we hope that you go forth tonight through Saturday morning and see some really fine journalism.
Yeah, sure.
Investigative board. Thank you so much.